Peace and blessings, family. This is your brother asarimhotep, and I am back for part 2 of our discussion. And this one is titled Zema-Tawy, and a possible reference to Kemet as a dialect variant. I didn't create a flyer for it or a thumbnail, so this is the thumbnail you get. It is what it is. Last minute thing. But anyway, so we are continuing from our previous conversation on the etymology of the word desheret for desert and red land. And so that's a lot to unpack unto itself, but this is a separate conversation, so I wanted to have it separately. So with that said, we are going to get busy in a moment. So just sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. And we are back. And what happened to there we go. We are back. So I want to thank each and every one of you who are joining us again from the first show. And I know it kind of breaks the flow of things when you switch shows, but I didn't want that one. I wanted that one to just be that. And then we can expand and do what we need to do here. So love and light to each and every one of you. So peace and blessings again to Brother Kemo ben Israel, and Sister Mika is in the building. And Get That Work TV, that's a tight name. Has anyone created a broken down, more simplified curriculum for teens to learn in meta nature? I believe that Dr. Raketti Ahmed has. I know she has a children's book that deals with the food, but I believe that she has such a curriculum. So you may want to look up Dr. Raketti Ahmed. And Infinite Minds, peace and blessings to you. And Sister Gigi, also California in the building. So thank you and any of you who are joining the conversation right now, whether you're on Facebook, whether you're on YouTube, or on X, formerly known as Twitter, right? So I'm just going to get started. Let me share my screen. Oh, actually, before I even do that, I want to remind everyone that we're going to have our good brother Sekou Kela this coming Sunday, September the 24th at 2 p.m. I believe it's 2 p.m. Eastern Time, New York time. And he's going to be talking about science and African spirituality. So, as many of you may know, him and Brother Unk, the pseudo killers, had a debate recently on this topic. So, he's going to give us a little background of the debate, and then we're going to let him share some slides from that discussion, regarding, whether we should adopt science and abandon spirituality, or adopt African spirituality and drop science. So I think that's a debate Brother Unk was trying to have. But that, Brother Sekou was like, we don't have to choose. And so I think that's what his discussion is going to be centered around. So that's going to be this Sunday on this channel at 2 p.m. Eastern time. So hopefully y'all can catch us live. But if not, of course, it will be archived for you. And as always, make sure that you that is right. Make sure that you hit the like button. And if you are new to the program, make sure that you subscribe. And so you can get notifications when we have these lively discussions. So I am just going to get started here and share my screen once again. So it's in the same presentation that I had in the last show. So I didn't make a title for it, so hopefully y'all can see that. And I will hide that, and I'm just going to start from the current slide, right? So again, the title of this presentation is Zema-Tawy, the Uniting of the Two Lands. And what I'm going to show is how the comparative method is used can be used. Oh, I'm sorry, can be used to prove the meaning of the word Kemet itself. So for everyone who claims that it means the black land and the like, or the black people, and now some more silliness, the black cattle, um, they forget that the ancient Egyptian language betrays them. And we're going to see that here. And so, in the last conversation, when I was discussing Alessandra Nibi's text and her arguments, she kept bringing up this concept of the uniting of the two lands. And in the ancient Egyptian language, that is brought about by this term. If you can see my mouse circling in the lower left hand corner, you will see this phrase that we colloquially pronounce as Zema-Tawy, meaning the uniting of the two lands. So that word Zimir means to unite or to tie. And then that ter is the word for land or earth. And then we is the dual suffix. So it refers to two things. And it should be noted that when we use the two or the double suffix, it normally refers to objects of equal characteristics. So, for example, if I'm talking about my two arms, or if I'm talking about my two legs, right? There, in essence, you're talking about twins. And so, actually, I equate that term to the word meji in the Yoruba language. So that we, or we say we, but it's like why ye, but it's meji in the Yoruba language, meaning two or twin, right? And so you see on the left hand side this kind of rendering of the Zema-Tawy concept. So in the center is the glyph for the consonant sequence Zimir or Simir, because the Z became S, right? So that's what you see here, right? The uniting, and then they say the Tawi or the land, but it doesn't show you necessarily the land. But what you're seeing here is these two different plants, the lotus and the lily, of that supposedly represent upper and lower Egypt, right? And so when they're saying this, the Egyptologists believe that it is, the uniting of upper and lower Egypt, right? And but Alessandra Nibi, she makes the argument that it is actually the uniting of the eastern and western lands, right? And she provides some evidence for that argument. And so, like what you're seeing here on this right hand side, and this is the god Hapi, that's an androgynous being. So you see a male body and beard, but with a female breast. So it's kind of has an internal duality within this personified concept here. But on the right hand side here, this is the bottom of a throne, and it is a list, and you can find it in the Cairo Museum. And so on the left hand side, representing the West, is uh, Horus or Heru, and then the god Set on the right hand side. So this is his uncle, because this is the brother. Set is the brother of Osiris, which is the father of Heru. So in this situation here, it is you're seeing this this uniting of the two lands, right? Because these are the symbols of the two lands. And um and so this is in the center here, this is a heart and trachea or windpipe. And so this is the glyph for windpipe, but it represents the consonant sequences Z and R or S M R for those who, so that's what that is. And so this is what you're seeing, this particular concept here. But I'm willing to argue that this is another play on words. And so this is what we got to be conscious of. And this is why I want to, emphasize that when we are saying that a term or a phrase means something, that we actually have to provide a proof for it because of the many words that look alike on the script and probably sounded similarly or alike in the language. That you'll have a word and a symbol that means one thing, but they're actually referring to another word that is pronounced the same way. And we, as late comers to the language and culture, we'll look at this and have the the wrong impression because we just go with our first mind and say, oh, well, that means that, and then we just run with it without any proof. And so it is an analysis of this phrase that sparks the real conversation that we're going to have in just a moment. So if you remember from my Umoja Volume 1, I made the argument that this Sema or Semer, representing Egypt, is kind of like an upside down tree, and that this was the heart and lungs area, which it is, and it kind of resembles a tree. So, like when you look at a heart and lung, or the windpipe right here, so you can tell that this is a windpipe because you can see the lines in the drawing here. So that's what you're seeing. And then the heart area, but you see these little branches of veins and the like, and it kind of reminds you of either roots of a tree or branches of a tree. And so I made this connection in that particular text. But I want to argue now that really the Sema, this here represents the Nile River, and that the Shamar glyph that's supposed to represent Upper Egypt, in fact, represents this narrow strip or the land along the river here, right? So, and that the Mehu representing, Lower Egypt represents the delta itself. So we'll get some more clarity in just a moment. And Kim War says, would that be an example of the Ravis principle? Yes, that's exactly what we're talking about here. So some linguistics first, because we can't have no conversation without some linguistics. So here is some KM roots in the ancient Egyptian language. And so I showed this slide and the next slide in a previous conversation dealing with Kamji verse and addressing Dr. Obadeli Cambone's erroneous argument that you need to reconstruct ancient Egyptian before you can use it in the comparative studies in trying to reconstruct the larger language family. And so what I wanted to show, what I showed then and what I want to re-emphasize here is this process we have called internal reconstruction. And so you would do internal reconstruction when you're able to demonstrate that there's two forms of the same word, right? Or there's a grammatical morpheme that gives it a slightly different set of vowels or something to this nature. So if you have two forms of the same word, you provide a reconstruction for it, and then you find ways to verify that as the reconstruction or the initial form that was inherited in the proto language of that language that then split into two forms, right? So in this case, we're not going to reconstruct because we've already proven in another video that these two forms were inherited because you find the same two forms in other related languages. So that it was already two different forms in the proto language. So that's what we're talking about there. So we won't reconstruct, but it's not about the reconstruction regardless, because it's always about the sound meaning correspondences, establishing the sound laws between two forms or two sets of forms and or two or more languages. So in this instance, we're just, for convenience, we're going to name it Chicom A and Chicom B, right? They could be the same dialect, but for the sake of convenience, we're going to assume that these are two different dialects. So in the Chicom A column, first row, we have Kim, meaning black and dark, and then Kamim, meaning to be black and to be dark, right? And then we have in Chicom B this form Zimeri, darkness, right? And you have Zimir meaning dark, which I didn't put there. And so you have Kimi, so-called black bull, and then Kemet, black cow, and then Kimiet, cattle. Some will have, black cattle. But we can tell by the other dialect form that it has nothing to do with blackness. It's just cattle. Because we have this form, and I show other forms in the book. Zimir meaning wildlife, Simir, wild bull, and then M becomes W, and then S and Z interchange with sh, as we mentioned before. And so we see a variant form, Shawa, meaning donkey, right? Because it all has to deal with wildlife and not simply just bulls. So Sekem, to grow old, and then we have Kim, to arise, to amount, or to mount up. And then we have Sim, the oldest, Semeswiti, elder, Semesu, elder, Semes, to be old, to become old in Chicom B. And lastly, Kim, to accomplish or accomplish, to end, to complete, or be complete and full. And then we have Semeru, complete. And so we notice in Chicom B that many of the forms often end with the nasalized volar trill, right? But it seems to be dropped in Chicom A. So this lets us know that these are two different languages or two different dialects, right? That one dialect kept a set of uh, grammatical morphemes, while the other ones, it dropped those morphemes, right? So keep this in mind. So you see at the top that Chicom A, K in the first consonant position corresponds to Chicom B, Z, and S, and sh in other instances, right? And then M corresponds with M in the second consonant position, and sometimes W, because M interchanges with W, right? So we get these, we get 4 examples of these, so we know that these are regular, and these cannot be disputed by any sane person who understands how to do historical comparative linguistics, right? So now, we have Chicom A and Chicom B, and we're going to add Chiluba to the corresponding set, right? So we have Kim, complete, put an end to, and then we have Chicom B, Semer, complete, and then we have Chiluba, Sula, to be finished, completed, to be tired, exhausted, right? So we can see that, the first consonant correspondences is KSS, and then the second consonant correspondence is MML. So in Chiluba, so KM and SM in Chicam or Egyptian corresponds to SL in Chiluba. And we see this pattern all throughout. So Kim, profit, and to pay. And then we have Isu, because remember, M interchanges with W, meaning payment, which corresponds to Sela, to pay the dowry for a wife, and then Sala, price. So another SL correspondence to KM, and then SW. And then notice on this right here, and on the third row, that we're missing a KM word for windpipe and lung, which remains in Chicom B. And so we have Zimir, windpipe lung, which corresponds to Chiluba, Chisulu Sulu, lung, right? So this is what the internal comparisons does. It lets us know what the correspondences are internally, but it also lets us know what is missing from each dialect. So we're missing a KM, meaning lung or windpipe, in Km.A, but it's in Km.B. But now we have this word Kemet dorsal fin in Km.A, but it's missing in Km.B, which we would expect the SM or ZM consonant sequence form. But for all these examples, we find all the words in Chiluba with an SL consonant sequence form. So Musalala, fin, flipper, right? So there are other KM consonant correspondences in the language. So I know for a fact if I don't find it in KM form, I'm going to find it in another dialect form of the language. And I am right as almost always. And so it is in this part of because the KM becomes dotted HM in Egyptian as well. So we can say that the KM and dotted HM are part of the same dialect. So we have dotted HMW. It says body part, throat or intestine of an animal. And so that's what would be the windpipe or lung. This is your throat, uh, and because it has the same shape, also the intestine. So they uh, correspond to, so it's based on the shape, right? So this dotted HM. And so, of course, because I always show my work, let's prove. So we already established that KM equals ZM SM. So the principle of internal correspondences show that A equals B and B equals C. Therefore, A equals C. So this is A. So A equals B and B equals C. So we can see here SM meaning priest, Simwi, a priest, Sim, high priest of Ptah, Memphis, and Mehi, a priest. And so it should be noted that the M dotted H interchanges, or you'll see the inverse. They're just inverses of the dotted HM, and we'll see that further down. So sim, attention, care, to help, mehi, to care for, to be concerned about. So the syllables are inversed, but semi, respected, dotted HM, majesty. Semer, God's bark, mher, meher, bark of the so-called meher, a boat. Zimir, to copulate with. Hemes, a phallus. And this S is a suffix of body parts, right? And then meth, child, and then meth, the child. So this proves further that these all correspond here. And so I know that this MH or the dotted HM is part of this dialect because, like the KM dialect, it too is often missing this morpheme, this nasalized trill as a third consonant in these forms that you'll see here. So this provides some added evidence and proof on that. And so, of course, I can't stop there. So that's how we know. Again, Zimir meaning wildlife, dotted HNT, Hanet meaning an animal, Semer, wild bull, Hamizi meaning crocodile. And I explain this because the ultimate meaning is just wildlife. So with this same root with the Z suffix, it means crocodile, right? And then Zimeret meaning wild cow, Kemet meaning cow. And there's another variation of this word that means something else, but it has a different suffix. But I didn't put it here for the sake of space. So we have Zimir, rod, pole, staff, Hemet, stake, Km.t, spear, Semer, to slay, Chemin, to butcher, Chemez, to slay, to mutilate, right? Simi, a pastor, meth, plot of land and field. And so someone on the internet doesn't understand how the word for Kemet, for example, can mean pasture, because its internal corresponding form, semi pasture, or you could just say a field of wetland, because a pasture is a place where animals graze, right? Meth, a plot or a field, and then semi, to report, complain, acknowledge, accusation, him, repeat, report of speech, right? So we demonstrated beyond a shadow of a doubt that the SM equals dotted HM and MH, and I'll show the KM and MH in the text. So that's why again we say Kemet, a pasturage with an abundance of grass and water. And so this meaning actually comes from the cognate in the Herero language, which I kind of showed earlier. So it's Oganda, and I show it in the dictionary where it says village, but more properly a pasturage with an abundance of grass and water, which confirms our initial hypothesis earlier in the text, right? So with that said, this is why we can say Kim equals Zim in, like when you say Zema-Tawy, right? And so this is a variant, a word, Zimir. It means a country name, right? And so notice the glyphs for it. So this is S, and then this is M. This is a biconsonantal M, nasalized velar trill here, and this is a phonetic complement. So so this is a phonetic complement here. And then this is a ideogram, and then this takes all three consonants in sequence as well. So just like how we had Desher and then Flamingo, was a reinforcement of the pronunciation. It's the same thing here. It's Zimmer. But notice the other determinative here, the N23 irrigated land. So this is why it says a country name in the TLA. So I put here these different variations of the word Kemet, because here's the word Kemet again with the irrigated land. And this is technically an irrigated land or water channel glyph here in version 2 of the glyph. And so is 3 technically. So actually this is a variation of this. So we have the word Kemet here with the same determinative as the word Zimmer here, the country name, right? And so there's a note in the TLA. That's a long note in German. So I don't know German that well, so I have to translate. So I went through several different translations to reaffirm the translation. And so now I'm going to give you the discussion in the TLA of this term Zimmer. So I'm going to show you that this word Zimmer is, we've already established the sound meaning correspondences inside Egyptian. So we're going to see now that it reaffirms our argument for the word Kemet itself. So now, so it says in the TLA, Zimmer is the name for a specific type of land. So this isn't Zimmer meaning to unite or to tie. This is a word Zimmer meaning a type of land, right? It says a country name, or the name of the country, or it says country designation. So when you click on in the TLA and on the note, it's going to pull up this information here. So it says Zimmer is the name of a specific type of land that is mentioned a few times in the late Old Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom, around the same time that the word Kemet emerges in the text, without the passages providing much information about the type of land. However, he says, according to a grave inscription of Nefer Sheshem Pepi called Seneni, it is full of cattle, goats, and donkeys. That's what a pasturage is, because a pasturage, a semi, right? So that's Zimir is a variant of this word simi, meaning pasture, and meh, meaning a plot of land or field that we mention in terms of the word Kemet itself, right? So a Kemet, a pasturage with an abundance of grass and water. And so, a matter of fact, when we go into the Wolof language, we have the word Kam, which means it's a water land, a land where animals come to drink. And in the context of a land with a river in it, we call that a riparian land. So let's keep going. So you can only have a land full of cattle, goats, and donkeys if there is enough water there to feed them. So it gives some sources, and then it continues. And according to a treaty from Sayut, arable land lie on it. So it's a type of land with arable land. So it's letting you know there's a type of field and farmland with an abundance of water that allows for cattle, goats, and donkeys to congregate there and drink. So it continues. He says, while excuse me, he says, while the grave of Jafahapi Resner in this place, it says from 7th contract from the grave, my bad. It says, while he and Davashel in this source identify the plant behind it as Rush, the M22, and assume a place name, Simaresi, Gardiner suggests a reading of Sedge, M26, and thus Semer Shema, Zimir, land of Upper Egypt, a country name. See Reisner a bit. So that's why even in the Waterbush, it says a country name. It's Zimir is part of Zimir Shema. And we're going to get to what Shema means in a bit. It's all going to tie together. And hold on one second as I continue here. So now we're going to go to this book here. It is Ki Baruch Hu, Ancient Near Eastern Biblical and Judaic Studies in honor of Baruch A. Levine. So in this book, you're going to find, you've heard me mention this, he has since passed, but by the name of Professor Ogden Golay. And he wrote in this text, Ki Baruch Hu, an article, Kemet and Other Egyptian Terms for Their Land. So let's read what he says about this term Egypt. So he gives you a history of when the word Kemet appears in reference to the state and all that in the 11th dynasty and the like. So he says, the first non-literary sources mentioning Kemet seldom employ the newt symbol or the town sign 049 associated with cities and settlements. Most of these early examples of Kemet either write the word with no determinative or with the cultivated land sign. So he's saying here that in the earliest non-literary sources, non-mythical sources mentioning the word Kemet, they seldom, if ever, employ the newt symbol. The town symbol is that is associated with cities and settlements. Most of these early examples of Kemet either write the word with no determinative at all, or else with the cultivated land sign in 23 that we mentioned earlier, that we see here in this form of the word for land or country name, right? So, and frequently have Kemet in parallelism with some word for the Desheret, the red land, quote unquote, thus setting a pattern followed throughout Egyptian history. The contrast implied in the common usage is between the blackish soil of the fertile valley and red yellow sand of the upland deserts beyond the cultivation. In other words, many of the earlier examples of Kemet appear to refer to a type of land rather than the political and geographical entity that we call Egypt. And so we then argue that it's from this notion. So remember that this Zimir is the name for a specific type of land that is mentioned a few times in the late Old Kingdom and the Middle Kingdom. So we're saying that these two are internal cognates, Kemet and Zimir, right? And they both refer to in their earliest renditions as a type of land. And we get the description here that is a type of land that allows for, it has an abundance of cattle, goats, and donkeys, and it has arable land on it. So it's telling you. So we're seeing that these two types of lands are equivalent in terms of Kemet, in terms of Zimir. So and so so it's from this notion of the type of land and used to refer to a country name that the word Kemet then becomes the name for the country itself, the state. And not because of some cattle, some sacred black cattle or some sacred black people, right? Even though we would argue that they are black people, that's not the origin of the term. So let's continue, right? So I just wanted to show that how these two different sources support each other in continuation with our being able to establish. And notice that Zemeri, darkness, is a word, Zemer, meaning dark. And so they don't define Zimir as the black land, even though there is a word Zimir meaning dark in black in the language. So this is how we know that these are homonyms, the homographs, and that these are not, the word Kemet does not derive from the word black or dark, because it's internal cognates. We can prove this with other internal cognates. It has the same exact thing. So this is what we call a proof by a proof by I forget the word that fast. A proof by contradiction, right? So let's continue. So it gets better. So another unknown, he continues. So it's broken up into several parts. And so another unknown evidence for this country can be found. So it's a country. So notice that both the terms Zimir and Kemet ultimately come to refer to a country within the territory of Egypt, right? So he says another unknown evidence for this country can be found on the Cairo CG 20001 stele from Gebelin. And it says, there is the Zimir land, similar to Senini, Mechem Shepesh Neb, meaning filled with everything noble. So it is a kind of land that has an abundance of resources on it. So when they're describing the land, he says there is the land, there is the Zimir land, that meh, because that's what it means to fill, im shepesh neb. Everything is filled with noble everything, or every, right? So filled, so we translate in English, filled with everything noble. Finally, based on the inscription of Seneni Fisher, outside of page 157 with note D and Skinkel, supplement the Zimir land in an inscription of Sin Nejesu E, which has only been preserved in fragments. Comparable to Senene, this would then be filled with cattle, because it is a land where a lot of cattle and donkeys and everything else can graze. And I discussed this in the text. because I think that Zimir represented the same type of land in Upper Egypt, and then Kemet represented the same type of land in Lower Egypt. These are two different dialects, two different languages being spoken in the same place. And they use their dialectical variant to refer to the same type of land. And so it is my belief that the word Kemet applied only to the delta in the beginning. And its equivalent was Zimir, meaning Upper Egypt. It was the country, what we would call Upper Egypt, right? So it continues. The same designation could be present in the Papyrus Ramesseum. This receipt is written as if it were the word lung, but since it is named between a pond and sites, it is likely to be a location. So this is what I mean by they're using the Rabus principle when they're talking about Zema-Tawy, right? It's a play on words for the uniting of the two land, but in reference to the country of Egypt in terms of Ter and Zimir, right? And so, furthermore, it is something on which something else grows. So, it's a type of land for which things grow, which suggests a name for a kind of piece of land. What have I been arguing for 15 years now? And what did, because they be talking about the peer review, what did they say? He told you. And we've been cited this text. Many of the earlier examples of Kemet appear to refer to a type of land rather than to a political and geographic entity we call Egypt. And we know that this isn't a desert land. It's a type of land that it has that you can cultivate and grow things, just like its internal cognate, Zimir, where it says it is something on which something else grows. The word red means to grow, right? It's a type of land. So it continues. The sparse evidence and fragmentary context at least allow the conclusion that the Zimir land is a fertile land suitable for arable and pasture land or pasture land. So let's, I got to keep going back because, people be forgetting and just think I make up stuff. So when we talk about a Kemet, a pasturage with an abundance of grass and water, right? So let's go back because, So inscription number 19 from the Wadi Hamamat further shows that it can be created artificially. You can create land, artificial Zimir. There, this word is once written as in Papyrus Ramesseum the seventh. In the Seneni inscription and in the one from Gebelane, it is classified with the foreign countryside in 25. From this, Fisher concludes that the Semer was a part from the cultivation proper and was perhaps the marginal region that unites the cultivation in the desert. In the only supplemented passage in Sin Nejesu E, he translates it on page 157 as grazing lands. And so, for those of you who have the text, when you get into chapter 3, tell me the discussion that I have. Oh, my bad. It's going to be in chapter 2 because we're talking about the newt symbol, right? And we're going to be talking about the delta and that being the region of cattle herders, right? And this is where the Fulani and everybody used to roam through, right? Like all this stuff comes together when you read the literature, the primary text, and the like. So, and then these are some more notes. I'll just read the bottom one. In the passage mentioned in the 12th hour of the Book of Gates is saying it is not the Zimir country that is mentioned, but rather, according to Hornon, underworld, books of the Egyptian, a unifier. So these are just some sub notes in there, right? For this one, could discuss whether the Zimeru land belongs to this, which is mentioned in connection with Zimeru Zerechu in the late Ramesside. Lansing papyrus is something on which the student for his teacher can build a country house and plant it with trees. The latter could possibly just be a modernization of the term Zimir-Ta. At least that is the implicit assumption of those who edited this passage since Blackman. So it's just different notes in the same thing, and then gives you some more commentary, author, structures and transformations. And actually that was translated because it's a German text. So all this was in German originally. So hopefully, y'all can see exactly what we're talking about here, right? And so we're going to continue. So for those who don't know, so-called Lower Egypt was called Ta-Mehu, right? So that's what we see here. And then Upper Egypt was called Ta-Shemahu. And so this was its own country, Ta-Shema. And Lower Egypt was its own country. And so the totality is the so-called uniting of the two lands. And I think in some contexts, Alessandra Nibby and others are correct when we're talking about the East and the West, but it also it seems more so the North and the South in terms of the land. So these are two different countries that were united. And so the Upper Egypt is represented by this sign here, which is the heraldic plant of Upper Egypt, the flowering sedge, maybe, and it's pronounced. We say Shema because we transliterate it as upper S, lowercase m, lowercase a, but this is a D or a Z sound, right? And but it's interesting, and this is where my hypothesis comes in, and I'm going to do further investigations and to provide evidence for or against this hypothesis here. I do not believe that because again, the ancient Egyptians used paronymy to the death, right? And this word Shema, although representing this plant in Upper Egypt, it should not be referred to as Upper Egypt and Lower Egypt. These are two different words that refer to the characteristic of the land along the Nile. And so this word, there's a word in the language Shema that means, and remember that from the TLA, is a root. So there's a root Shema meaning to be narrow and thin. And there's a word Shema meaning to be slender. And so when we have the W suffix of place, because remember, if you have my text, there's two suffixes of place in the Egyptian language. One is W and the other one is T. So we have this Shemau, meaning Upper Egypt. But it is my argument that it is referring to what this is supposed to represent. So if you look at the Nile, it is very thin in terms of the river and the landscape versus when you get to the delta, which is wide, right? So what I'm thinking is that, what they're calling Upper Egypt really actually extends all the way to the tip until you get to the delta area where the cultivation is spread out more and is wider. So it is my argument that the Shema refers to a characteristic of the Nile and the land being very narrow and thin and slender in comparison to the Delta, right? So when you're talking about the uniting of the two lands, You're talking about the uniting of the delta and the thin strip of usable land that's along the Nile, right? And so again, this is Tamehu, Lower Egypt, and in the TLA, it is defined as the delta. So when you say Tamehu, you're talking about the delta region. And then everything below the delta is quote unquote Upper Egypt, which is a mistranslation. It's the thin, narrow, slender part of Egypt, right? And so that word meh, meaning mehu, filling, meh, to be full, to fill, to grasp, to seize, to lay. These are homonyms, I believe, right? So it has to do with filling, to be full. And so remember that meh dotted hm and m dotted h is the the syllabic inverses of each other, but they're also cognate with the word kim. Because remember, there's a kim, to be complete, to be full. And so when you find those words for Kemet in the 11th and 12th dynasty, most of the places all named Kim, because there's other places named Kim and Kemet. They're all in the Delta. That's not a coincidence, right? So this is a better variation you can see. So you can see it looks like, so this is where the heart is. So that the heart, area here, where the branches are, they're referring to the delta. So this is Upper Egypt. All this is Upper Egypt, all the land and things along the Nile, and then you get to the delta area. So it's uniting these two parts of the Nile River, which is why the stress of the Hapi god and goddess, because it's kind of both, is the one uniting in most of these other renditions, right? So we're talking about the wide, more expansive land, but there's also, remember that mehe also means field. So when we go back to these terms here, plot of land, field. So remember, in pasturage. And so in chapter 2, I provide citations that talk about that primarily the goats and cattle and the pasturages was all in the delta area, right? So well, that's some other stuff there. So that's pretty much what I wanted to present on that. So I'm going to pause there and stop sharing my screen and check comments. And if anybody wants to come on, I'm going to put the put you in the link in the chat. Link to join chat. Boom. So for those on Facebook and those on YouTube, you'll be able to see the link to join the chat. But if you're on X, formerly known as Twitter, then you will have to join us on YouTube. So let me try to scroll up and see if there's any commentary. Because y'all be all over the place in the comments. And let me put on some chilling music while I view all that was going on. Let me. Have any questions? I'll be on for like another 30 minutes or so. So let me just see what you got going on there. Y'all talking about craziness. Let's see. You think? Yeah, I think I saw that one already. Say like Nipsey Hussle. What's good here? I don't know, y'all in your own world. He thinks. Let's see. Thank you, Sister Mika, for the comment. And remember, you can join the program if you want to make a comment or ask a question, or you can ask in the chat. So I haven't gotten back to the bottom of the chat, but I am just kind of scrolling to see if there was any worthy comment. But it looks like Zoo and Ka are in their own discussion on Jews and Muslims or whatever. Let's see. Nope. Said put a kufi on. Says I can't come on, but I did have a question about L sounds. Basically, if you had any thoughts on the lack of L's. Well, we don't know if there was a lack of L's. And if you're talking about an ancient Egyptian, or are you talking about in human languages in general? If human languages in general, I would need to know who made that argument. But if we're talking about in ancient Egypt, you'll have some scholars that will argue that there was an L, that actually the R, what we're considering the R sound, isn't actually an L. And or the nasalized of velar trill was an L sound. So it really just kind of depends on what author you are speaking about. But I don't see any questions. I don't see any comments worth mentioning or responding to. And Donnie Williams makes the argument that period is when L comes in. It may have always been there because in Coptic, where some words have R, some dialects, when one dialect has R, another dialect may have an L. So they're allophones of each other. So it's kind of hard to tell. So do the velar trill R and NG to be separate speech communities? Maybe not necessarily. So well, in terms of and the nasal R velar trill in Egyptian, I don't know if that represented an sound in Egyptian, but I can tell you that it corresponds to not only R or L or D in Bantu, but also and in Bantu as well. So there's some examples that I give in Appendix A of those correspondences. And also even with just Proto-Bantu and Sumerian, right? So, that's why like those words with those ends can also be representative of like a G sound in compared languages. Like I've been able to verify with, with Sumerian. And so we have someone with us. Welcome to the Mbongi, and please state your name so we know how to pronounce it. And you have a comment or question.
Peace and blessings to the family. I have a question.
All righty.
I kind of got in late on the program, but so far I'm loving the content, the information as usual. So I had wanted to ask you, brother, if you are familiar with the brother Dr. Lawyer Luca.
I'm sorry, can you please say it again?
So the brother's name is Dr. Lawyer Luca.
I don't think so, at least not off the top of my head, if I heard the name right. I'm trying to find, normally I have some headphones with me, but I left them in the car. So, if I ask you to repeat, there's two reasons. One, I'm old, and two, this isn't very loud. Let me raise the volume up again. So I do apologize. I'm going to ask you one more time just to make sure I got the name right. For the name that you mentioned, doctor or professor or somebody.
All right, bro. So there seems to be a slight delay in the audio, but I don't know if you can hear me clearly.
I can hear you. Go ahead.
All right. So the brother's name is Lawyer Luca.
Yeah, I thought I heard it correctly. So no, I'm not familiar with him. But what is his contribution?
So he is, from what I understand, he has written a good number of books within the field of Congo cosmology.
Mm-hmm.
And he a lot of his work is directly influenced by Dr. Kimbwandende Kiabunsekifugiao.
All right.
And and I obviously heard you yourself mention or reference Fukiao a lot. So yeah. I thought that it would be interesting to have a brother like Lawyer Luca here on this program, here on this show. So if that's a brother that you are not familiar with, you should definitely look him up. He's relatively low key, but there are some interviews that he has done where he goes, he takes a deep dive into, Congo cosmology, as it pertains to, especially Kimbwandende's philosophies. So that would definitely be interesting to have him on the show.
All right. If you can, I don't know if you're on a device or not, or on a like a laptop, but you should see on the right-hand side a button that says private chat. And if you can type in his name in the private chat, and in that way, because I have Amazon.com. So does he have work, or is he just speaking like in interviews or something like that, or like videos?
So from what I've seen, it's interviews primarily. Okay. But as I said, this brother is relatively low key, so he hasn't really done a lot of interviews.
I see.
But
I am
hopefully, yeah.
Yeah, this is his full name, because I don't think I've finished reading, but I have the Bukongo. The Congo religion is Egypto-Sumerian connection and congruence with primitive Christianity from 2020. So I have that text. So this is the name. I'm going to make a banner of his name. So this is who you're speaking of. and I'm going to share my screen and show on Amazon. So these are the various texts that I believe, if we're speaking about the same person, this is the stuff.
Correct.
Yeah. So if I remember correctly, like he may be part of that. What's the group? What's his name? Samuel. What's it? Samuel. And Bongi, some group. So it's a lot of kind of like Christianity stuff intermixed.
Yeah, you're referring to the brother Simon Kimbangu.
Yes, Simon Kimbangu. Yes, like it's a whole group of them who will try to make these connections, but it's not, in my personal opinion, in a very systematic way that is usable. But I believe I have, and I'm gonna double check in just a moment, the Bakongo book. But I would love to hear what just his overall arguments are, because I don't have all, and it seems like he's written a number of texts, and they're all, well, he probably has some.
Yeah,
but he probably has. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Absolutely. He has a lot of interesting information, and the thing is that he ties it a lot into the Mbonji, the idea of Mbonji, and how the when one takes a deep dive into the Congo cosmology and look at the language in itself and how rich it is in understanding the ideas and philosophies of the people, is very, very interesting. So that is something that this brother is definitely very, very valuable in that sense.
Yeah, I would definitely try to reach out to him. Usually before I reach out, I like to finish, like if I have a book of theirs, I like to finish it before I invite him on, so I have more well-rounded and adequate questions. So let me see here, and then I've added to the conversation our good brother Shakara is in the building. Peace and blessings to you, all the way out in Europe currently. What's good, my brother?
Peace, and thank you once again for the presentation. I'm sure others have done so. And yeah, I do have a question. I'm gonna get to that in a sec. But the brother Kiatezua, he does also have an interview on Ancestral Voices channel that was done either last year or the year before that. I can't remember exactly. But if I remember rightly, there were some issues with the internet. But I think there's a 2-part interview there as well, if brothers and sisters want to get a bit of an introduction to the brother. Yeah, because I do remember watching that. And so yeah, I have a question related to this, because I know you're talking about Zema-Tawy, but my question, well, I get to it's a 2-part question, yeah. And it's a question that it's so obvious to me, but I've never heard anybody ask you it, and I've never heard you address it independently either. So let me ask the first part first. Could you just, my question is dependent upon an understanding of the concept of paronymy, yeah? Okay. So if you could just briefly explain paronymy, and then my question will make more sense.
Alrighty. Hold on 1 second. Let me see if I can find, because I will be surprised if so let me pull up. Let me see. That could work, but not necessarily. So I'm gonna, because I want to give. Let me see if I can find another. Let me see, because I got. Okay, no, that one doesn't have it. So I'm gonna give 2 more tries, and I'm just gonna.
Take your time, I know how it goes.
What'd you say?
I said, take your time. I know how it goes.
Yeah. So, because I know I have them in a book, but I don't know if I made a, what do you call it, a presentation with some other examples in it that that you can show. So, of course, I have to. Let me pull up that one. Let me see. Okay, good. So, all right. So I'm gonna do the first examples first. That doesn't make any sense. But the first presentation that I pulled up, I'm gonna show that first. Then I'm gonna go into the formal definition, right? So here, so from the current slide, let me know if it's clear for you.
Very clear.
All right. So paronymy is a word linked to another word by similarity. And let me turn the music off real quick so we can I'm in this let me pause that so we're clear. So no distractions. All right, so it's a word linked to another word by similarity of form. That is to say, one, the common usage of a words which are almost homonyms but have slight differences in spelling and have different meanings, or words having a similar sound but different orthography and different meanings. So like in English, all or an all, right? So these 2 words sound the same, but they're totally different. And so what happens is in African spirituality, or just old cultures in general, what they would do is they would create and join these concepts based upon the similarity of words. So for example, there's a reason why the concept of ma'at is represented by the feather, because there's a word that we pronounce as ma, meaning plum or feather, right? And so you can see they combine these concepts together, because there's a ma'u, meaning to extend the limbs. So what do you see the goddess Ma'at doing? Extending her arms. There's also a ma'au, meaning wind, breeze, and favorable wind, right? And so we're already dealing with feathers, so these kind of come into context in this sense. And then of course you have ma'at, truth, righteousness, justice, order, et cetera, et cetera. And so all of these kind of concepts, are personified and brought together visually in this particular context. And there's usually so this is when I was talking about Yahweh. So we'll skip that for right now, and we'll go into this conversation. So this is on the Ankh. This was my presentation on the Ankh symbol. So this is another formal definition of what paronymy is. Again, a word that is derived from the same root as another word, but has a different syntactic use. For example, perilous and parlous. An adjective, paronymous, a word linked to another by similarity of form. For example, preface is a paronym of Latin prefatio, right? There's, and the added thing is when it comes to culture is that there's a belief that two words that sound alike must necessarily come from the same source. So this is before historical linguistics is ever thought of by human beings.
Right.
So what our ancestors did is they would try to link words that sound similarly. So as a linguist, we have to keep this in mind so that we don't assume that just because these words sound the same or are written the same means they derive from the same form. So here's a source that I cited in one of my texts. So another variation of paronymy is a concept called prolegomena, right? It's the same thing. So to the study of the Idoma concept of God by Robert G. Armstrong. So we're calling paronymy here and how it is used amongst the Idoma in Nigeria. So you see this word. So this is what he states: the Aduf mudfish or catfish is used in ancestral sacrifices as well. The sentence is probably an unconscious quotation from a standard prayer formula in which, for grammatical reasons, the demonstrative particle a follows adu. For example, neho chadu a. This produces a neat bilingual pun on the well-known Hausa word adua, meaning prayer. Thus, the sentence contains the double entendre, the fish that is called prayer. You get it? Because adu meaning the mudfish and adua meaning prayer. And because they're similar, the Idoma connected these two concepts, even though these words have nothing to do with each other. So a linguist would be able to distinguish based on compared words that this adu is not the same as this ardua in prayer. So I show that combination with the unk in this presentation, so I won't go through that now. It's still the Zema-Tawy as we were talking about earlier.
All right. Cool.
So, yeah, see if I had
another
one here.
So the second part of my question, then, like I said, it's so obvious that I'm surprised. I've never had anybody ask it before, but forgive me if somebody has. But then the obvious question then becomes in relation to this debate around Kemet, and the term Cam or Kem, yeah. And do you apply the concept of paronymy in terms of the relationship to the concepts as far as fertile land or riparian zones, blackness, and all of the other variations of semantic use of the term chem? Does the term paronymy apply in that regard?
That was one of my research questions, and this is something that, matter of fact, let me pull up, and I address this in the text,
right?
So, and I'm going to pull it up for you right now, kind of. Let me just find it. There we go. And can y'all see on the screen? So this is the PDF version that I have. So when I turn it into print, and so there's a section in the introduction where I'm addressing Capo-Chichi, and so on Facebook some years ago, him, Capo-Chichi, and Jean-Claude Mboli were in a discussion, and he brought up an issue that let me see. Where is that section? Because he brought up that concept as it regards to Kemet. And so I addressed in here this whole line. He repeated it in a blog post some time later. And so I addressed the whole, because, you know, everybody wants to suggest that the word, here we go. So here we go. So let's go here. Right. So, because this will show you how I looked at this as well. So I put in here because again, Mboli and Capo Chichi already had a discussion on various different things in this one group that we belong to, and then, you know, the question of Kemet came up, and then Capo Chichi, well, Jean-Claude Mboli brought up the fact that you don't see the word Kemet used in parallel with the words for black in any of the scripts. So I'm not going to say that you don't, because, you know, we haven't read all the hundreds of thousands of papyri and all that, but from what we can gather, it doesn't appear to be any kind of play on words, any kind of use of paronymy in that sense, like how we saw in the example from the Idoma that I cited earlier. So Capo Chichi then repeats this on his blog post, and so I put in here, Capo Chichi then attempts to correct, I put in quotes here, a statement made by Mboli in 210 concerning his interpretation of the place name Kemet, for which I'm not sure if he, meaning Capo Chichi, whose mic is that?
Just in case it's mine.
Yeah, for a second before you come back on. So right, so it says Capo Chichi then attempts to correct a statement made by Mboli 210 concerning his interpretation of the place name Kemet, for which I'm not sure if he, meaning Capo Chichi, understood what Mboli was stating. So now I'm about to quote Capo Chichi on the blog post on Kemet. He says, another author opposing the translation of Kemet by the Black One is Mboli 210. This author states, however, so this is Mboli, however, no Egyptian document over 3,000 years of history ever refers to any link between Kemet, Egypt, and Kim, Black. This absence is all the more curious as the ancient Egyptians used to make links between entities and notions which were pronounced in the same way. For example, men, Remech, conceived as tears of the god of Ra, right? So Capo Chichi comes and follows, says, this assertion is contradicted by a passage from a text inscribed on the walls of the temple of Edfu as noted by Oriel. And so you have this phrase here, and he says, because Black Egypt is said of the eye of Osiris, it is his pupil. Right. And this is not a case of paronymy, because if it was the case of paronymy, then the word Kemet would look and sound the same as the word for pupil. And that's not the case, because Japheth is the word for pupil. And this doesn't sound anything like his like the word Kemet. It's not in the same vein. So that's why I say I am not quite sure Capo Chichi understands paronymy, given the example he chose to try to rebut Mboli's argument. What Mboli is saying is that there is no play on words, to his knowledge, between the word Kim, black, and Kemet, Egypt, in a similar way that we see between Remiet, tears, and Remech, people. So when you, as found in the coffin text and in the late pyramid Bremner Rhine papyrus, right? And I note that in both words there is an RM consonant sequence. Therefore, there is this pair of homographs, and I put in parentheses homonyms as a question mark, inspired a creative narrative that played on the fact that these two words sounded similarly. However, in the example given by Capochichi, there is no such paronymy. The word Kemet, Egypt, and Japhet, iris, including the pupil, are not words that would sound alike to inspire paronymy. They're not even close. Capochichi then uses his misinterpretation of Mboli's commentary to link it to the statement made by Plutarch, which he also misinterpreted, which we will address further below. So I have to also debunk the Plutarch argument, because people keep saying that Plutarch makes the argument that Kemet or Chemia at the time, which is, I believe, is a Bohairic pronunciation of the word Kemet in the Greco-Roman times, was in parallelism in, used for paronymy in the same way for a word Kemet, meaning pupil eye, or Kim or Kemet meaning pupil. And I show in the text that there's no such word as Kim or Kemet, pupil, in the Egyptian language, and that the modern recordings of Kim and Kemet, pupil, in the TLA and for example, in the Wörterbuch are wrong. There's no such word in the Egyptian language. And I go through all the proofs, and then this forced a reanalysis of the Plutarch. And so I went into the raw text of the Plutarch in the Greek and did a transliteration word for word and gave the proper reading of that phrase. And not only that, I sent my analysis to several Greek scholars who are very conversant in read and translate the Greek text. And they all, with the exception of one, and I put his oppositional opinion of my translation in the text too, so you can see both sides, of the arguments, and did my rebuttal to him on there. But the rest all agreed with me that reading of Plutarch is wrong, and is further shown to be wrong because there's no word Kim or Kemet meaning pupil in the Egyptian language for him to even make the comparison. So we know that the Egyptians themselves never made the comparison. So to my knowledge, there hasn't been an analysis or what's the word I'm looking for? An example of paronymy of Kim and Kemet in terms of black and Kemet itself, in the same way, for example, that the most common and most popular example of this is when you see the in the myths that the god Ra created man from his tears. And that's because the word for tears, remiet, sounds similarly to the word remet, rome in Greek, for the words for people. So this is a perfect example of paronymy in action. You don't see, I have yet to come across, and if one exists, it's so rare that you have to like dig and be at the bottom of a library somewhere to find it. It's not a common thing. So I always allow for the possibility, but I always want to see the actual evidence before I come to a conclusion. So I hope that.
Let me see if I'm understanding you correct. Yeah, I'm a poet. Yes, I'm a speaking poetical terms. Yeah.
Go ahead.
In essence, what you're saying right, is that in order for there to be evidence of paronymy in relation to all of the different usage of the term chem, there would have to be some poetical usage of it within a text.
Not necessarily. That's just one. So I look for others. For example, so like if there was like one of the criterion, one of the research projects I was looking for was just a variation of the word Kemet written with any of the color determinatives. Because you would think that if they really wanted to stress the blackness of Kemet, that you would find at least one variation with the D3 hieroglyph, which is used for black, or the pellet glyph. And I'm not sure if you've seen that part of the discussion from the beginning, that you see all these other color signs or words in, they don't have an ideographic representation like with the word Escher for the flamingo that's red in color. So they just do a little pellet like this, and this represents color. So you never see the word Kemet written with those, right? And so that's one test. So these are just different tests that I'm looking for to see if they're using it in these different various ways. So that's why, for example, and let me reshare my screen again. One of the things that the criterion that we used was to look for the internal correspondences and to look for the same classifiers or the determinatives in the word. So if I can demonstrate that KM equals ZM regularly internally within Egyptian, my hypothesis is always going to be that the form of the cognate of the word in Egyptian itself is going to have the same determinatives, because it's going to be within the same semantic universe. It's going to be applied the same way. And so you can see, even with this term, it's applied the same way as we see for Kemet. That's why we go into these particular texts when it talks about, for example, Kemet and their other Egyptian terms for their land. He specifically notes that many of the earlier examples of Kemet appear to refer to a type of land rather than to a political or geographical entity that we call Egypt. And so this is why it is terminated with the N23 glyph that we see right here. Like, these are the earliest forms. So we have to go to the earliest forms to see, how it can be used. Because just like Km.t is an actual temple, and then it was, by the Greeks, was used to refer to the particular area, and then the whole country, which we now pronounce as Egypt. Right? So it would be in a similar plane like this. It's a land feature that then becomes the name of the country or a particular area, which then is applied to the entire territory. That's common in human history.
Putting Kemet aside for a second, are you saying that paronymy doesn't apply, or you haven't found examples of paronymy applying to any of the variations of Kem? Aside, putting black aside for a second. So because like you said, like you demonstrated, there's various different semantic meanings for the different variations of Kem, and paronymy is not so you're saying no, and obviously that seems a bit strange to me, only because the leap of association between blackness as a color, black soil, and the connection between fertile land as associated with a river, and if that makes sense, these are concepts that don't seem to be too conceptually, so conceptually distinct, if that makes sense. Like the connection would be obvious to
so in that same chapter, I cite, for example, the Greeks who talk about, for example, because in that same little section where Plutarch is talking about, because what Plutarch is talking about in that text in section 33 is he's naming all of the black things in, not all, but the major things that are black in the Egyptian culture, at least at this time. And so he gets to the soil, and he says, you know, he mentions Egypt, and he uses their word Egypt, which they call Chemia, has the blackest of soils like the pupil of an eye. That's my reading of the particular text. But in that whole section, before we even get there, right, they're talking about all these different things that have to deal with blackness. And then they get to when they're talking about Osiris, because Osiris, you see those depictions of him black, right?
Yes.
And it talks about how the all things that is moisture, all things that is wet is associated with Osiris. And things are black because they are wet, they're moisturized. And so the focus is on the water. And then the darkness of everything is a byproduct of something.
It's a consequence of the water, right?
You get what I'm saying? So I mentioned in the text that that's a possibility, but we're back to where we started. The central theme itself is the water. And so
I'm just trying to see, like I said, examples of what I consider to be quite an obvious association between water, fertility, and blackness. And you've brought up another one, which is Asar, and the association with blackness, in fact, known as the perfect blackness, right? In that respect, Lord of the perfect blackness, is a phrase that we've come to, that has been popularized in relation to Asar. So the association seems to be there, if that makes sense. I don't know, and I'm not even asking these questions because I'm passionate about the need for the meaning to be black. The association just appears to be obvious to me. So it just seems to be a question that needs to be asked, if that makes sense. You know what I'm saying? So I think I get what you're saying. What you're saying.
So I wanted to show. So I showed this in the Deseret conversation, right? So you can see where the soil is rich and dark here is because it's wet.
Yes.
Right. But notice the color of the soil in the same area that is dry as hell.
Yeah.
You see it? So like it's not that the soil is naturally, because they're in the desert. The soil is actually dry and brittle and white and gray. But once it is wet and moist, then it becomes dark. And this is what Plutarch talks about, that the darkness of everything is the result of the presence of water. And so I leave room for that to be a possibility. But it would still be based upon the presence of water. And so we know that the Egyptians aren't black because they're wet, right? Like it wouldn't apply in the same way that Diop was trying to apply it. So all roads lead back to water, the presence of water. And so there's in that section where I read off with Capo Chichi, I go into the actual text which he tried to cite and shown how this actually, because it's dealing with the eye of Horus. And the eye of Horus itself is Egypt. And it tells you straight up in the text that the eye of Horus is Egypt, right? And so when you see the Eye of Horus and it has all those fractions on it, those divisions, these are certain hectorates and sections of land in different representation of different hills, mountains, and all of this other kind of stuff. The Egyptians tell you in the actual text that this is what it is. And so what happens is when the Nile River floods, it is because when they talk about that Egypt being the pupil, they're talking about the Nile River being the pupil of the Eye of Ra. The Eye of Ra and the Eye of Horus is Egypt. Its pupil is the Nile River. And when the Nile floods, it's like when your eyes dilate. They're using it metaphorically here, that the eyes are dilating, the pupils are dilating, and the water floods over and dilates on Egypt, which is the eye. And this is the connection here. And even in the Egyptian text, the word Egypt refers to not only the land, but the Nile River itself. So like it's so much to it. And that's why I encourage everyone to read the book.
Yeah.
Because I have all the citations in there in the original Greek. And of course, I consulted classicists out here at the University of Pennsylvania, as well as other departments as well, you know, just to confirm, because of course they'd be like, well, that's your interpretation. It is my interpretation. I can read, but I'm not stupid. I go and I consult, you know, other expert people who are more expert than me on that particular subject. So it's a better understanding that everything has to deal with farm work, farming, farmland. It's a wetland, right? And so that's why this actually confirms my initial linguistic analysis that connects it with the word Kiduru, because as I cited in the text, the word Kiduru refers to a land that has been that is wet as a result of the overflooding or the inundation of a river. That's literally what Kiduru is.
Yeah. Yeah, my brother, I get it. Like you said, I do need to read the book, because I'm not gonna lie, on the face of it, a lot of what you're saying seems to be fueling the premise of my question, right? Not that I'll put any hard answers on it right now, but it does seem to be fueling some of the premise of my question, and the thoughts that I was having around it. So yeah, much appreciated. But like it's a continued conversation. So I'm definitely gonna get the text and read it. But just to say finally, in terms of the intentionality behind the research and the need for us to understand how we conceptualize and name within African cultures, I think that's an entirely important endeavor. And these conversations can only lead us to a stronger place in terms of that understanding and being more scientific in our approach to African studies. So much appreciated as always.
Indeed. Appreciate it. I haven't been keeping up with the chat, but I'm gonna have to get out of here soon, because I have a shift that starts at 6, so I have to leave y'all, and so I'll be back another time. And again, we have our good brother. Let me find the banner. Brother Sekou Sela is going to come back to the Mbongi, and he's going to share some of his slides from his debate with Unc on the Sa Neter program channel, you know, dealing with science and African spirituality. And before I switch that, what was I don't know if you were able to see it, the actual live debate, Brother Shakara.
Oh yeah, I was in the house.
All right. So what was your, you know, your brief analysis of the conversation?
I think the breadth and the depth of Brother Sekou's argument was comprehensive, yeah, in terms of him winning the debate. I think even in terms of an appreciation of what science is, its virtues and its limitations, I think he gave a more comprehensive definition. And I also think that because he wasn't trying to limit himself to the forced dichotomy that was created in the question, I think it became evident, you know, that his argument just considered more, if that makes sense, took more into consideration in terms of, especially the latter part of the title, in terms of what is better for the Black communities of the world. You know, when you put that at the end of it, there's so many things that you have to take into consideration that I don't think our brother Bobby managed to take into consideration. So you know,
indeed. Well,
one of my favorite sides from Sekou is that he broke down the scientific method, and then he had another slide that had the spiritual process, right? Which I thought was very good. That was an excellent use of diagram in the debate, and I think it was excellent. His biggest problem was time, and so I had said to him after the debate that he definitely needs to do a show where he's just has more time to explain his slides, and so I'm glad that he's coming to you on Sunday. And
from what I understand is that he had prepared the slides, for like 10-20-minute presentation, because that's how he thought it was going to go. But then at the day of the debate, they either changed it or he just assumed and didn't verify. But it was like 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. So like he had to break up, and so he just wasn't prepared. At the time.
No, he did well nonetheless. He did well nonetheless. I think most of the people on the actual debate itself were not his fans, so to speak. But then most of the people in the live conversation after the debate were more in line with what he was trying to bring. So yeah.
Oh, and for Chilembwe, just want to show something real quick. So I got the wrong book. So the book that I have of his is the religion, the Congo religion. And so the Egyptian origins and the conversion with Christianity, as you can see here. So this is the book that I purchased and that I have to finish reviewing of the author. So yeah.
Oh wow.
So yeah, I had the wrong one. So it wasn't the Bukongo book. It was the Congo religion, the Religion Congo. And so yeah, I just wanted to say that. But with that said,
I wonder if
hold on.
No, go ahead.
Go ahead, Chinegwe, and we'll come back to you, Shakara. Go ahead.
Now, I was just about to say to have Chilema Mukenge that you've already had on the show, to have the brother Leoluka would be like a full circle moment for sure.
Indeed, I plan on having some more Congolese scholars, on the program, especially getting closer to the time, because I'm working on another book. This one is an edited book, and it's called Path to Ma'at. And it's going to be what they call a fetkrit. But I'm substituting that word with the Chiluba Bantu equivalent, which is basically a commemoratory document, a commemoratory book. So it's a book in dedication to Dr. Mubabinge Bilolo. So I'll have I'll have a couple of texts or chapters of his translated into English and put in the text. I already have a number of scholars who have already submitted some chapters. So Dr. Bayi, if you're familiar with him, what is his first name? It's Bayi Malongwa. If you're familiar with him, he mainly writes in like Portuguese, though. And so, but I believe like all their works I got to translate into English. So I just told him to write comfortably in their language. So I think he sent his in Portuguese. Dr. Kalamba and Sapo. He sent his in French, and it was another philosopher. I forgot his name. And it's some more philosophers that Dr. Kalamba and Sapo is like, I'm gonna get them to send in, and they've all agreed, and they'll be sending theirs too. But it's so, you know, I want to have them on, and I just got to set up to make sure that I have a good interpreter on the channel for those conversations or whatnot. So yeah, it'll be in line. So, you know, I'm always repping Central Africa and Southern Africa on this channel real hard, and some West Africans that I've given, but you know, I've been for some reason really going hard in Central Africa and Southern Africa. So yeah, to get him on, yeah, I just got to finish the text. So I don't like to have authors on the channel unless I've read their work, and I can summarize it and ask critical questions. So yeah. But I'm sorry, Brother Shakara.
No, I never had nothing more to say, bro. Give thanks.
Okay. No doubt. Well, I do appreciate each and every one of you for coming out and listening to the conversation, both. So I'm pretty sure that I've set up enough information that 20 videos is going to follow, trying to debunk what I said in the video, which is fine, and it keeps the conversation going. But again, if you haven't gotten the book, because of course you can't speak intelligently about what I said unless you read the full context, which is in the text. And so it's 500 pages. So, you know, even the little bit that I give you on the video form, there's so much more nuanced, that the reason why I shrink them down the way that I do is because it's just too much information. And so a lot of these arguments that they keep making is already debunked, you know, in the text and their sources. But, you know, I'm moving on into the more anthropological part of the discussion of the race of the ancient Egyptians. So that's going to be another text in which I'm the editor, and it's going to be scholars contributing to that text. So volume 2, you know, is in the work. So I got the Bilolo text in the work. I got the Kimoyo text in the work, and volume 2 of this text in the work. So that's why I don't have time to be on the internet debating these folks about stuff that they haven't even read. But appreciate each and every one of y'all who have already supported the text, and we'll start having some conversations in the near future about each chapter. And so we'll have open forums for those of you who have actually purchased the text and have, you know, read up to a certain point and the like. So with that said, I am going to end actually with, since we played on the last show, we'll play it again on this show as well, for the upcoming series that he has coming up on his channel, and or maybe Zoom, because it's a paid event. So so I'm going to end with his video, and then I will see y'all Sunday the 24th again for Brother Sekou Science and African Spirituality. It's going to be a dynamic show, 2 p.m. Eastern Time. I believe that's 7 p.m. London, and we'll get it in. Until next time, Hotep.
Kush TV presents Sankofa, The Future of Black History, a unique Black History Month online series exploring all dimensions of time as we chronicle the Black past, command the Black present, and empower the Black future. Workshops include The Future is Black, Why is Black History Under Attack? With Shakara, We Create Value, The Ingenuity of Enslaved Africans, with Robin Walker, Ancestral Calling, Agriculture, and the Opobo Library Initiative with Aya Eleni. Quantum Field Theory as African Heritage with Asarimhotep. For full information, including dates and registration, visit gotkushtv.com. We have made history. We are making history. There is history still to be made. Sankofa, the future of Black history. A Black History Month series not to be missed.
Feeling like I dropped the draw for and caught Uno. Came to kick the door while the game man judo. Pin game low, that's why they give me kudos. Inspired by the 3-0. 595, check it for pack flight. Hit the turnpike, slide to a baseline. Gotta sound like I just hit the 85. Oh, I'm so ready, by enemies necessary. We gon' be legendary, hold up. About to grow the payrolls. If you see the vision and you're with it, you should say so. Cause we about building, elevating the millions.